Yeah.
And we do record these meetings, and we will make this available in the next couple of days after this meeting on the NDOT website. So we'll have that ability to go back. If you have neighbors that weren't able to be here with us tonight and want to review this material, it's a helpful tool to be able to do that. So as we get started, I'll say once again, good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jeff Hammond. I am a consultant working for the Nashville Department of Transportation, NDOT, that you see in the lower right-hand corner. And this is Poplar Creek Trace Traffic Calming Meeting. Appreciate your attendance tonight. We'll be as efficient as we can to get through some of the material that we have. In doing that, it's helpful if you're not speaking to remain on mute, but we give you the ability to come off of mute anytime you want to. We're usually a pretty small group at these meetings, and so feel free to interrupt and ask a question or make a comment as we go through this. I won't mind at all. You also have a chat feature here on WebEx that you can push, and I'll keep that open on my end. If anyone would rather type their comments, feel free to use that as well. And I think that's pretty much all the housekeeping I have to do. As we get started, I'm going to cover three main things tonight. One is I'm going to give you a little background on the traffic calming program, what it's all about, and how Poplar Creek Trace got introduced into it. Secondly, maybe most importantly, I'm going to show you a very preliminary concept for our thoughts on what traffic calming might look like on your street. And then the last thing is give you some tidbits about what to expect from us during this process, some time frames, and just kind of set expectations about the next steps in the project. So, and I will say your councilman, he did let me know he's in budget meetings. He may be joining us later, unless Councilman, you're already joined. I just don't see you there. Usually give them an opportunity.
I'm here, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
commandeered committee room in the corner.
Joining us. If there's anything you'd like to say.
No, Jeff, I appreciate you putting this together and everybody taking the time to participate. Frankly, I think this application process started before I was elected last year. So this is kind of my first exposure to this program as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to learn a little more about it.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time on a busy budget hearing night and a rainy night in downtown where it looks like you are. All right, we will go ahead here. Just a little bit of a background about traffic calming. It is a residential street program. This is really a service of the Department of Transportation, focusing on communities like yours, residential streets that have had a problem with speeding on the street for various reasons, as opposed to business, commercial type streets, industrial streets. We don't do traffic calming on those. We really focus our efforts on places where people live, because it's two things. It's a safety issue, and it's also a quality of life issue. We understand both of those things. Secondly, we focus on physical solutions. We do have some tools in our toolbox that get to education, and reinforcing to people what the speed limit actually is and encourage them to go slower that way. But we have found that nothing slows people down quite as effectively as putting something in the roadway to either drive over or to drive around. And I'm going to show you some of the examples of that and some of the tools that we have a little bit later. And then lastly, we do focus on speed reduction. That seems obvious, but sometimes people will engage this program hoping that we can make traffic go somewhere else, push those cars to a different street. That's very difficult to do, and it's also not a main objective for us, generally, because it's just we don't want to push the problem somewhere else. Instead, we'll keep traffic where it is if we can and design a project to do that, but just get it to drive more responsibly on your neighborhood streets. As I mentioned, there are other aspects to traffic calming and promoting slow speeds. Education is one of those. The other big partner is, of course, Metro Police Department and their ability to enforce the speed limit laws that we have. Unfortunately, as we all know, the police department does an incredible amount of very important other work other than just enforcing traffic laws. And so they don't always have the ability to be as responsive and put as much time as we may like on this one aspect of their job. So that's where NDOT steps in as the keeper of all things within the public right-of-way, and engages us as engineering staff to come up with engineering changes or solutions that help to self-enforce the streets. And so we do that with some different traffic calming measures. There are, of course, a lot of different reasons why we do traffic calming and why it's in such demand. This is just one that we like to promote, and that is statistically the impact of high speeds if in the unfortunate occurrence of a car versus pedestrian crash. We know you all have a great walking neighborhood. You like to be out walking and enjoying your street, not necessarily just to get from point A to point B in a car. And that's not always very comfortable. And that you're not uncommon in that. Many streets in Nashville are that way. And so we like to promote safety and to look at the most extreme example of that. If there is a crash, we want people to be able to walk away from that, and you have a much higher chance of doing that if cars are driving at a slower speed. This continues to be a very in-demand program. In the cohort that Poplar Creek Trace was introduced in, we at that time had over 500 streets who had made the same type of application that you have. I think in the latest window that closed just a few weeks ago, we had another 200 new applications. It just keeps growing. And we, just to put that in perspective, we can normally accommodate about 50 requests a year. We do 2 different application windows a year and select 25 generally. Last summer, there was some additional surplus funds that council saw fit to allocate a little more towards traffic calming, and so your street is a beneficiary of that, and so we were able to do a few more than 50 this past year. So we're winding those down and getting more and more of those on the street. And I say it's in demand just so that you will know you are certainly not alone in some of the issues that you've been seeing on your street as you've applied into the program. We're seeing this in all types of neighborhoods and all corners of Davidson County. It really seems to be a pervasive issue in our neighborhoods. One of the things we like to promote is Hub Nashville. Hub is if you're not familiar with it, it's a clearinghouse of services that you can make requests into dealing with all things metro government. So, and it's not just NDOT, if it's things like stop sign being knocked down, or if you have a request for sidewalk. We mention that here because there are some issues like those 2 things I just mentioned that are kind of related to traffic calming, but they're just outside the scope of what we can provide in this program. And so the best place, if you have something like that, the best place to start with that request is Hub Nashville. It gets to the right people. Metro government is a big place, and there's a lot of different offices there. And so if you just put it in hub.Nashville.gov or pick up the phone and call 311, those folks will get that to the right person there and get that where it needs to go. But back to how we select these programs, with over 500 streets all vying for a little attention and little funds to do a project like this, we have to prioritize those in some way. And so we use this scoring system to do that. About 70% of the score of the project comes from data that you would probably expect. It's the speed that we have found the traffic to be traveling on the street, and also the volume of traffic, how many cars there are in a 24-hour period. That's the bulk of what we're looking at. But we also look at a couple of other things. We look at, is there a documented case of a pedestrian being struck by a car? We look at, are there we call them non-driver accommodations, things like sidewalks or bike lanes or transit service. If you have sidewalks in your neighborhood, you actually score a little bit lower, with the premise being, cars may be going fast, but at least people have somewhere to walk that is a little safer. So, and then the trip destinations. Are there places in the neighborhood or close by that may make it more likely that a person does want to walk or ride their bike. Things like parks or schools, things of that nature that tend to boost the score up as well. We collect all of that data every time we have a new application window and roll all of that data into the scoring system and really just go down the list, and we'll take the top 25 or in this last case 85 or whatever it is that we're working on. Fortunately or unfortunately, you made the list. So I'm sorry you're having those issues, but the good part is I guess you were high enough, and hopefully we can get some aid in that situation. Here's some of the data specific to your street, and I'm going to show you a map here in just a second, but we are going, this project does cover the entire length of the street. It's a fairly short street, Old Harding up to the dead end there. That's about half a mile, and so we'll take a look at that in just a second. 85th percentile speed is just a statistical way that we in our industry look at the speeding issue. And so the 85th percentile speed is 37 miles an hour. That just means that 15% of the cars that were on your street were going faster than that. That's kind of the threshold that we use. That's probably about average. The type of street we do traffic calming on, I had a meeting last night, and theirs was 32, which is probably a little below average. So it can really run a pretty wide range there. Your traffic volume is 1,355. Again, that probably is slightly below average. People are often surprised that there's that much traffic on your street, 1,300 cars per day. That's not surprising to us. That's again maybe a little below average for the streets that we're doing traffic calming on. So we don't expect any issues with that much traffic. One thing that does make your street a little unique that you're probably aware of is the width of it. It's a wide street, and it has some variability to that. It looks like it's somewhere, depending on where you're measuring, somewhere between 35 and 40 feet. And I know you have a parking lane striped on either side of that. So I think it's really only about 20 feet from white line to white line where the driving occurs. And then it's another 10 feet on the outside of that for those parking lanes. Certainly it's something we can work with, but we will have to design a project that incorporates that width, that makes sure that we're dealing with that effectively. I'll explain what I mean here in just a minute. Here's the map that I was going to show you. So I know the words are really small on this, but Poplar Creek Trace is that little pea green looking line there where the big arrow is pointing to. And again, we're going from Old Harding Pike, that's on the right-hand end of that line, up to the dead end, just past Collinswood. This is an interactive map. If you want to look at this more closely, it is available on NDOT's Traffic Calming website. And the reason you might want to do that has to do with these colors that you're seeing. You're in that green color, which just means that you're in the program, and we're working with you through our meetings and our design process. So the other colors that you see here, probably the most common one is that purple or pink color. That just indicates that there has been an application put in on those streets. So if you're driving and you're curious as to whether a street has already been applied for, you can look here and see that it has, and you don't need to do that again. There are some other colors. I'm not sure we've got any on this view, but probably the other most notable color you will see if you were able to pan around like you could on the website is a blue line, and specifically a blue dash line. That indicates that there has been a traffic calming project installed somewhere. So if you're curious about speed cushions, say, and you want to go see how you like them, how they work, and how they feel, we make that information available so you can drive to the nearest one to you and drive on that. So it can be a helpful tool. Speaking of tools, let's spend just a minute looking at a couple of things, our most common tools that we have. And we start with the most common. The speed cushion is probably 95 to almost every project that we do practically has speed cushions on it. This has become Metro's really go-to countermeasure to combat speeding in neighborhoods. It is a factory-built product. It is something that we order from a vendor. So it comes off the factory line the same every single time, and we like that consistency. We know how it's going to perform. We know how it's going to hold up. We know what it looks like. All of those kinds of things make it kind of the go-to material. Let me pause here just a second. Meeting information to join.
There we go.
Yeah, are you able to see now, Ms. Doris?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. These are cushion. They call them cushions because they kind of look, I guess, like little pillows that you see here. These are individual things. It's not one big bar all the way across the street. It is raised only about 3 inches, but most people will tell you that's enough. It's shaped much differently than a speed bump like you might encounter in Kroger's or the Home Depot parking lot or something like that, which really jar you. This is not that product. These are intended to very gradually take you up and over, and so they do a much better job at slowing speed down, but not coming to a stop. I guess one of the things that we have seen, just anecdotally, that I have seen as I drive in streets that have been traffic calmed is people probably go slower than they really need to. You find people that slow down to almost a stop sometimes to go over these. You really don't need to do that. You can pretty comfortably, in most cars, go over these at 15 to 20 miles an hour. And then over the course of the project, we're seeing average speeds in that right around 25 miles an hour, which is our speed limit generally. So they are 6 feet wide, which makes them too wide to straddle. Your car is not able to straddle that. You're going to have to put at least one side of your vehicle wheels on top of that. But they're not so wide that emergency vehicles are impacted by them. That's the whole point about having a brake in them. And the reason why this is really our go-to now is that things like ambulances, fire trucks, those types of vehicles have a wider wheelbase and aren't as impacted quite as much. We do work closely with the fire department and first responders. They're aware of what we're doing. They put practically no restrictions on this device on any of our streets because they know that they can get where they need to go and navigate these. Another design feature that we have is the length of them. The width is fixed. It's always 6 feet wide, but we can vary the length of them anywhere from 7 to 10 and a half to 14. Our standard is 10 and a half. That's really our default. We're using those almost everywhere. But if it's a really urban neighborhood like a Germantown or East Nashville, and there's people everywhere and cars parked everywhere, and we really want a more aggressive slowdown, we can use a shorter cushion, 7 feet. If it's in more of a rural area, we can, and we're more concerned, with the volume of traffic and maybe comfort, we can lengthen that up to 14 feet. The other aspect I would say is the configuration that you see. These pictures here reflect some of that. You see 2 cushions, you see 3 cushions, you see, if you look in the lower right-hand picture here, the little plastic sticks, the little white delineators. The whole point about configuring these is so that we make sure we've got good coverage from one side of the road to the other. One thing that we have learned is that if you give some of these drivers any ability to skirt these and go around them, they will do that, even if that means driving into your yard to do it. We have seen that. So we have some design techniques using our signage and using these things to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so that's the point about the width and why sometimes it's 2, 3, 4. I think we've got one application that is 5 wide. These streets are just that wide. Yours will be more than 2. It may be more than 3, just given the width of yours. But we'll come up with some ways to do that and make sure that your parking is not overly affected and that at the same time cars can't get around it. A very close cousin to the speed cushion is the speed table. Works just the same way. You go up and over. The only difference, of course, is it does not have a gap in it. We reserve these for very special conditions. This is not a common treatment, again, because of the emergency response, and that's very careful to really try to strictly promote the speed cushions. But on occasion in parks, you may see these and those types of things. These are used as well, but they work the same way. same material. We do have some before and after information in terms of how much speed reduction we have seen. The short answer is they seem to work. We get we get very few complaints that they are not working. Some of the before and after data we can talk about it. It's somewhere in the order of 9-12 miles an hour, but I always caution every street is different, every application is different. The speed at which you're starting is different. You're at 37 miles an hour, so anyways, this is for what it's worth. It's good information, but there are no guarantees on what that average speed would be. Another tool that we have is the feedback sign. You've probably seen these around. These are getting deployed more often. It's a good tool. Again, we do have some before and after data here. I think where the jury is still out a little bit is how, over what length of time is that speed reduction maintained. I think there's an idea that, you know, if someone drives past this thing every day and sees it, it sort of loses its effectiveness over time. Other people who have these in their neighborhood swear by them and say it's done wonders. It's a wonderful tool. So anyway, we use them. We typically don't use them when we can use a speed cushion. Again, we found the most effective way is to put something in the roadway, but this tool has its place, particularly where we have an awful lot of traffic, or if it's signed at higher than 30 miles an hour, we'll tend to use more of the feedback sign. Occasionally, we will do some pavement markings and narrow those. Again, your street has kind of seen that in terms of having those parking lanes striped, and what that leaves you with is a narrower driving width, which is a good thing for traffic calming. The idea is that if a road looks narrower and feels narrower, people will drive more slowly. So occasionally we'll do that. We have to be careful. Like in this case you see here, there was a center yellow center line added. Sometimes that indicates to people that it is a more major street, and you know it's actually a higher speed is expected. So we do these very judiciously. Another striping change that we have really is reserved more for urban areas where sometimes we'll have very wide intersections, is to again narrow those, bring that turn radius in and try to narrow those and slow traffic down as they get in and out of the main street. So, and then the chicane, the picture on the right there, is kind of an artificial meandering of the road. It works okay if there's parked cars. This is not one we use very often. There's only 2 or 3 streets in all of Davidson County that have this. Not a very common one. And likewise, a traffic circle. Y'all probably know some of these that were put in Bellevue a few years ago. We're continuing to evaluate those. NDOT has not installed any of these very recently. There are some issues with school buses and things, you know, larger vehicles like that turning around them. You have to have an awful lot of pavement, very big intersection for something like this treatment. But we keep it in the toolbox. It certainly has its place. I'm talking, and I want to hear from you all, but you all need something to react to. And so the reason we go through those tools is just to kind of define, particularly on that speed cushion, what it is we're talking about. And so this is the concept that we have for your street. It looks a lot like concepts we do for most streets, which is pretty much a speed cushion based design. And so given the length of your street, again, about a half mile all the way up to the end, we have recommended that we think what would work best would be a series of 4 speed cushions from Old Harding up to just about up to Collinswood. We didn't put any on that very last dead end part. You can. We don't expect that there's a lot of speeding happening just for those last few houses that reside down there. But anyway, we've really focused. We imagine there is some cut through traffic from Old Harding to Collinswood, and that's probably where that traffic stream is happening. So we've really focused on that part. That part is about 2,000 feet long, and so the way we arrive at 4 being the magic number of speed cushion locations is that we take that length and we divide it by what we know to be a optimal spacing. That spacing for us is somewhere between about 400 to 600 feet. There's not a hard and fast rule, but we know if we're somewhere in that ballpark, that's close enough together that traffic's not going to clear one and then just step on the gas and fly to get to the next one. As you mount one set of speed cushions, you kind of already seeing and preparing for the next one. And so most drivers will determine, there's no sense in really going very fast in between. And so we get a good, nice, slow progression all the way down the street. But it's also not so close together that it just totally feels obnoxious to you all who drive over these every day, force people to maybe go a different way just to avoid them. If we do our job well and design a good project, cars won't feel the need to do that as much. They'll just slow down as they come up the street. So that's how we do that. One other aspect to that is in play here on Poplar Creek is hills. We won't put anything on a grade that's steeper than 8%. We don't like to go any steeper than 5%. And so we've looked at that at a desktop level. We'll be out and making some actual measurements on grade and all. But I know that is a consideration here. I think what you're seeing here in the rough locations of the cushions here avoid the steepest parts of the hills. But I put a big note on there. You see that we reserve the right to shift these if we need to try and avoid those hills. You don't have any significant curves. We also try to avoid sharp curves. But the other thing that you do have that you need to know about is driveways. And one thing that we don't want to do is put a set of speed cushions right in front of somebody's driveway. Nobody wants to have to drive over that as they go in and out of their driveway every day. We're aware of that. And so our policy is to try and keep everything at least 15 feet away from your driveways. And that's what I've got. I'd love to hear back from you if you love it, if you hate it, if you're very disappointed at what you're seeing, whatever your take is on it. We'd love to hear that, get some feedback, and go from there. Any thoughts on what you see?
No, I had a kind of a question and a comment. It seems like Metro across the board lowered speeds to 25 at a lot of the streets like Poplar Creek and Collinswood. And it looks like, at least in our neighborhood, you put up the signs at the beginning of the street, and let's face it, when you pull into your street, you've done it a million times, people don't notice the speed limit. I think a lot of people don't realize the speed limit was lowered to 25. Some people may think it was lowered on like the side streets, but not like Collinswood or Poplar Creek Trace. So your comment about the radar sign, I know sometimes you see the like temporary ones, just that would help let people know that, hey, it's 25 here. I don't know if people don't realize it, because a lot of people I've told were surprised that it was lowered. So that's
it's a good point, and it hasn't been 25 very long.
No, it hasn't. It seems like one day all of a sudden the signs were there, and some people noticed it.
Yeah,
people didn't.
Yeah, right. The other point you brought up is a good one, which is that there is another tool here in this program. We don't promote it because you're kind of beyond this stage, but there are people who have applied in that never get selected or have not gotten selected. You can request a feedback trailer, and NDOT will bring that out and set it up, and they'll leave it up for a couple of days, and I think they take it away and bring it back maybe 2 weeks later. The wait list on that thing is very long. They say that thing, I think they have a fleet of about half a dozen of them or something. But I mean, last I knew, sometimes that wait list could be 5 or 6 months long. Oh. But anyway, that feedback is
some people that don't know it's 25, and if they knew, they would go slower, and some people don't really care. I did have a question on the speed. What do you call them? Speed helps?
Speed cushions. Yeah.
Speed cushions. Is there any complaints that you get? The side effects of that is noise. Like people that live around them that complain that cars are making more noise going over it.
Yeah, that does come up. We're not the direct recipients of the complaint, so let me be honest on that. But we've asked that question of NDOT because that does come up at these meetings, and they'll say, it's very rare that someone complains. I mean, if you just go out somewhere where these have been installed and you listen, you'll hear them. I don't want you to think they're silent, but it's probably not much different than the car itself going by. It's just kind of a different noise. I think the fact that it is rubber helps some, maybe absorb some of that. I really don't know, but it's not a loud clanging. Now, if you get landscape trailers and those kind of things, and you got equipment that may bang around, that might make more of a noise. But just your typical car going over them, yeah, it's just kind of that dull thud.
It's probably not as bad as like the old speed bumps.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I would think so. Yeah.
May I noticed in an earlier slide that you had that Collinswood Drive is one of the roads that's also going to be considered for traffic calming. Do you have any indication of when that's going to happen?
No, sir, I don't. And so there was a color on that. You're right. It was
Yes.
that purple color. And that just means that there is an application put in for it. So it's in that pool. It's competing with all the others. It just hasn't come to the top yet. But every time there's a new window, we relook at everything. And so any projects that have not been selected, as well as new applications that have come in, they're all competing again. And so at this point, it just hasn't gotten to the top. So no indication about when or if on that one.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry for joining late, but I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Can street sweepers work with the cushions on? Because we
But
do
they
have
can't.
street sweepers that come.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that, but yes, they can. And another question that's related that's sometimes come up is plows, snow plows, and I don't know if this is a plowed neighborhood or not, but yeah, both of those things can. We certainly have streets in Nashville where both of those operate. Plows specifically, I don't know about the street sweepers, but plows specifically, these are put in a map, and so NDOT's plow drivers knows the location. So, not only can they kind of see them and have a visual, but they know those by computer as well.
Thank you.
As somebody who lives in the intersection of Collinswood and Poplar Creek Trace, I love this. I think this is fantastic. The speed at which people fly through that intersection is frightening, especially at night when you're walking the dog or just when kids are out playing. And so I guess the other question I wanted to ask is, at what point do you give consideration to making an intersection like a four-way stop, as opposed to that street, which is like Collinswood is a two-way stop, and Poplar Creek just goes straight through without a stop sign?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes people will ask, why don't we just make all of our intersections a stop sign? And your comment kind of points to one of the reasons we don't, is because people will ignore them. If they don't see cars coming out, and there's really not a need for traffic control there, and that's why you don't typically want to use stop signs as traffic calming. The way to go about that, though, is to going back to that hub, Nashville. You can make that request.
Okay.
And what they will do, the engineering staff will actually come out. There's a count process. There's somewhat of a threshold that needs to be met in terms of the amount of traffic generally. And then they can do that little study. And then actually the decision lies with a standing board of metro governments called the Traffic and Parking Commission. They meet monthly and consider those types of questions. But that request needs to start with NDOT, and they'll come out and collect the data, and then they would take a recommendation to that commission. So that's the way that process works. But Hub Nashville is the best place to start.
Thank you so much. I love this. I think this is a really great step forward for making the neighborhood safer, especially I have a child who walks to school. And so this is, I just am really appreciative of this.
Yeah, great.
Jeffrey,
Yeah, you there, Jason?
yeah, so sorry. Hey, Jeffrey, I just want to say thank you so much for this. My brother-in-law might be on this call. He lives right around the corner from Janice, and they've got 3 very young children, and I mean, people just actually he's pretty close to the letters. The last one closest to Collinswood, and I mean, I've sat on his front porch and watched people fly around that road, and it's been bothering him. So David, if you're on this call, look, your day's almost here. So, but yeah, this is, I think, very needed, and thank you guys for taking a look at this. Really appreciate it.
Right.
Jeff, could you repeat the timing again?
The timing for the project kind of implementation and all.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me, I've got a couple of slides for that. So let's advance. We'll be glad to come back to this if there's any more comments about the plan. We're here at the Yellow meeting, and I'm sorry if you can't see it. This is kind of a flow chart of the process of these types of projects. So we're here at one called neighborhood meeting. What we will do after tonight, it sounds like we've got pretty good consensus on what we're looking to put here. We'll go into a little more of a detailed design process. So what you just saw will not be the final thing. We will actually do a set of design plans. They're not so technical that you can't look at them and figure out well, you know, the specifics. But we will have something a little more in detail that will show exactly where we want to put the speed cushions, and it'll say something like, you know, these speed cushions will be 62 feet from the driveway at 123 Poplar Creek Trace, something like that. So those design plans will be assembled. They will be put on Metro's website, so you'd have the ability to go in there and review those. At that point, we can have a decision to make with you all. We can either go to a second neighborhood meeting, and it used to be that we did 2 mandatory meetings, but you know, a high percentage of the time we'd get to that second meeting, and it was basically a glorified version of what I just showed you without really any changes. And people were like, this is great, but I wish you'd have just gotten on with it and moved us into the process a little deeper and not gotten together again. So from what I just heard, it sounds like you may want to forego that meeting and go straight to the ballot. We're happy to do it either way. That's kind of up to y'all. But if either way, what we do end up doing is an online ballot. I'll give you a little more detail about that in just a minute. And that's a 6-week process. If the project passes the ballot, that's where the kicker is from a time frame standpoint. At that point, we're currently looking at about a year from the time the ballot passes to actual implementation. And you know, if you're in favor of these things, I know that's kind of a gut punch. It doesn't seem like it should take that long. It really shouldn't take that long. The construction itself is probably only about, on this one, they can do it in a day, but 2 days probably at most. This is not a long drawn out construction process, but we do have a very long backlog for just your streets and this. NDOT's aware of the issue there, and they're working on that. They've brought on another contractor, so it may be shorter than that. I hope by the time you guys' turn comes up, we've cut into that some. But I just want you to know, if you're looking for these before July 4th, it's not going to happen. So typically, right now, again, it's taking about a year. So I hope that answers the question about time frame.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Jeff, on that ballot, the success, the 66%, is that 66% of those who responded or 66% of everybody that was polled?
Yeah, good question. It takes me to my next slide. Perfect timing. So the way the ballot works is we're going to send cards out. You all may have gotten a card for tonight's meeting. Hopefully, at least some of you did. We send these cards and these ballots out. I'll show you who gets them, but we send them out to property owners abutting the neighborhood. You'll get that card. It'll have this messaging. You can either go online, most people do, or if you want to call NDOT and talk to someone and give them your vote, you're welcome to do that too. You go into a Nashville.gov webpage, put in a little information, and say you're for it or you're against it. At the end of that 6 weeks, we close the ballots and we tally those up. And if 2/3 of the people who responded are in favor, we'll move it forward. We're not looking for a certain number of people to vote. It's just like a real election. We just, of the people that vote, we want 2/3 of them to be in favor of it. So,
and in your experience, have you typically gotten the 66% or not gotten it, or what typically?
Typically we get it. Yeah, typically we get it by the time we get to this stage, and we typically get it. In fact, that information is made available on their website. So at the very end, I'll give you a link to that if you're not familiar with it already. One of the things that they make available to you is the results of all of the neighborhoods who have balloted, and you can just scroll down through there, and it's probably like, I would say it's close to 90% of the projects passed.
Okay.
There are a few that don't. Usually when we get to this meeting, we can tell if there's significant opposition. I'm not hearing it, but who knows?
Okay.
As far as the people who vote, this is what it looks like. We take a selection of the houses that abut the property. I know it's kind of weird. You have some of these little short courts or very short cul-de-sac streets. The people who abut Poplar Creek Trace will get a ballot. The rest of that little street will not. I know it's strange, but that's kind of a policy decision, because people always say, yeah, but these cul-de-sacs have to use the street like everybody else. And of course they do, but you see how many more people that would apply to and how our ballot would be. So anyway, the policy decision is that if you own a property that abuts the street to be calmed, you get the vote there. It's important to note we do send those to the property owner, not necessarily the person living there if it's a rental situation. If any of these I don't think you have any of these are vacant properties. I think they're all built out. So we'll send them to everyone. And I don't think you have any businesses or things like that. So it'll be a pretty straightforward ballot process. Any other questions about the ballot or time frame or process, anything like that? Okay. The only other thing is we'll leave you with my contact information and that of the project managers there at Metro. There's both of our email addresses. If you're calling in, I am JEFFHAMMOND, Jeff Hammond, at Birch, BURCH, transportation.com. Feel free to reach out, and then you see the NDOT TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov as well. Feel free to reach out after this meeting if there's other things you wish you'd told us and slipped your mind, or you have another question. Be glad to hear from you and respond to you as best we can. Feel free to reach out to me or NDOT or both of us. And then, as I mentioned there's the website with a lot more of that map, the ballot results. You can see past projects, design plans if you want to see what those look like. A lot of information. They're really about all things traffic calming in Nashville there. Again, appreciate everyone's time and interest in this project. Any other comments, questions as we wrap up here?
Hey, Jeff, I'll just mention if people haven't seen these in action and want to, I drive over them a couple of times a day, going across Timbers off Highway 70 right there by Bellevue Presbyterian Church, going to and from dropping off a 4-year-old at daycare. And you see people, walking through there and kids on their bikes all the time. And it really does seem to have slowed people down through there because they were using it as a cut through between Highway 70 and Sawyer Brown back there. So if you want to take a look at them in action, that's a good place to do it. And Jeff, thanks again for doing this. Great information.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Councilman. Thanks to all of you. Again, feel free to reach out there and watch over the next few days. Hopefully, NDOT will have the recording of this meeting up on that website as well, where you can see that. With that, I will wish you a good evening. Stay dry, be safe, and thanks for helping us keep Nashville streets safe. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeff.
you.